Hello everyone, welcome back to Story Time. We are currently reading Nan and Sidekick Grandad by Annaliese Matheron, and Annaliese is a local author who has very kindly said that we can read her book. So this is getting exciting. We need to find out what Nan and the Changs are going to get up to at Mr. Gregson's house and what is going on. So we are now going to read chapter 11. Whew, I hope you're all calm. I'm not. This is getting exciting. Sit yourselves down and let's find out what happens. Chapter 11, The Boss. Back at Mr. Gregson's, Ben was willing Kieran to wake up, move, open his eyes, anything, just so that he knew he was all right. But it was Mrs. Gillespie who murmured to him through her taped mouth, shooting him one of her icy stares. Ben had almost forgotten she was in the room. All right, I messed up. No need to give me a hard time, he thought to himself. He glanced around the room. It looked even more bare than it had from the outside. His gaze drifted back to Kieran again. Mr. Gregson obviously hadn't worried too much about tying him up. He'd secured Kieran's hands and feet in front of his body, hadn't bothered gagging him, and had left his feet free. If only he would wake up. Then Ben had an idea. He slipped off one trainer and kicked it into the air towards Kieran, but it landed short. He slipped off the other one and flicked it a little harder. Success! The trainer made contact with Kieran's chest and he spluttered into life. What? He said, lifting his head, just in time to see Ben, who was tied to a chair, fall backwards and collide with the ground. Kieran looked around in a haze. Mrs. Gillespie was tied and gagged. He was in a shabby-looking room. His head hurt. It was all coming back slowly. Then he heard footsteps. Mrs. Gillespie glared at him. Kieran laid back down quickly and shut his eyes just as Mr. Gregson and the Bulldog man entered the room. Bulldog lifted up the chair to which Ben was still securely tied to. I really hate kids, he said to Gregson. What, more than old people? Bulldog stopped. He appeared to be thinking. Gregson could almost hear the cogs moving inside of the big oaf's brain. About the same, he said eventually. I've had enough of this. I'm going to get the boss, Gregson said as he left the room. Hey, wait for me. That old woman gives me the willies, Bulldog said, chasing after Gregson. Kieran waited until he heard Bulldog follow Gregson up the stairs. Then he walked over to Ben and pulled off his gaffer tape. Kieran, you're hurt. Are you okay? Ben whispered. I'll live, Kieran replied, as he started untying the ropes around his hands with his teeth. Who are they? I don't know. Bad guys, I guess, said Ben. Mrs. Gillespie gave a kind of snort. Kieran gave her a dirty look. Just ignore her, he said reassuringly to his brother. Having freed himself, Kieran moved behind Ben and began to untie his bonds. He'd almost reached the last knot when the door swung open. Ah, Kevin, isn't it? So nice of you to join us, Mr. Gregson said. Kieran, Kieran said. Kieran, Kevin, Colin, what do I care? Soon you'll be dead anyway. Kieran froze. He had never been faced with the prospect of dying before, and the gun in Mr. Gregson's hand made it a real possibility. Kieran stuck his hand in the air. Bulldog grabbed him, tied him up again, properly this time, and threw him back into the corner. Mr. Gregson pulled a chair from beside the object-riddled table and placed it in front of Mrs. Gillespie. Now then, Mrs. Gillespie, you may think that my associate and I... He nodded to Bulldog, who was digging a finger knuckle deep into his ear. Have been unkind to you. Well, it is nothing compared to what the boss has lined up for you. As Gregson finished his little speech, the door swung open. Ben got the impression that whoever had opened it had been listening at the door for his cue to enter. The boss walked in. He was much taller than Kieran and was portly and prematurely balding. What little hair he did have was growing on one side and combed over the shiny dome on top. This balding man also seemed to be affecting his facial hair, as he had a thin, sporadic moustache splattered over his top lip. Ben thought he'd seen his face before, but he couldn't think where. The man sat down in the chair and locked eyes with Mrs. Gillespie. Ben got the impression that the two of them could have stayed like that all day long and never tire. However, it was the boss who finally broke. He snapped his fingers sharply. Bulldog leapt into action, retrieving a thin black box from the table and handing it to the boss. The box was no bigger than a book. When opened, Ben saw that it wasn't a box at all, but a small laptop computer. "Now," said the boss, "I have had enough of your games. It is clear to me that to get the information I need, I must do things myself." He shot a look at Mr. Gregson, who hung his head. The boss snapped his fingers again. Bulldog drew a knife and pressed it close to Ben's neck. Kieran gave a muffled shout and began to wriggle around on the floor. Mr. Gregson walked over to him and kicked him. "Shut it, Calvin, or you're next." "You will give me the code or I shall kill the boy," the boss said, staring at Mrs. Gillespie. Then he leaned forward and ripped the tape from her mouth. He turned over the piece of tape only to see all the hairs that once resided on her top lip were now stuck fast to the sticky side. He forced down a retch and threw the tape from him. "Now, the code," he said. His icy stare bore into Mrs. Gillespie, but she kept her puckered little mouth as tight as she could. The boss nodded to Bulldog, who pushed the knife hard against the flesh of Ben's throat. Ben could hear Kieran mumbling loudly on the floor. He didn't even realise that Bulldog had let the tip of the knife slice into his skin until he felt a drop of blood trickle down his neck. "I will kill him," the boss said, leaning towards Mrs. Gillespie. "Go on then," she answered. "Kill the boy. I don't care. He's nothing to me. Why should I mind if you kill him? One less headache for me." The boss was just as shocked as Ben was. Even Bulldog moved the knife away from Ben's neck out of pity for the poor boy. "That boy is nothing but a sneaky little troublemaker," Mrs. Gillespie continued. "What do I care if you kill him? He's a good-for-nothing, just like you." The boss looked at Ben. Poor lad, he thought. The wicked old bat obviously has it in for him. The boss signalled to Bulldog, who let go of Ben. "I thought you said you were going to kill him," said Mrs. Gillespie. "You always were weak and wicked." "I am not weak," the boss shouted. "And if I am wicked, it's your fault. After all, I am what you made me, Mother." Mother? Ben suddenly knew where he had seen the man's face before. Slap a dress on him, some makeup, and a wig, and he'd look just like his mother, Mrs. Gillespie. "Liar!" Mrs. Gillespie squeaked. "I never made you evil. You were always a greedy little boy. Perhaps I spoiled you too much and let you get your own way a little too often, but you were my only child, Arnold." "Don't call me Arnold. Don't you dare!" His face was so red that Ben thought he was going to explode. "No one calls me that. No one." Bulldog sniggered at the sight of this little tantrum. The boss shot him an evil glance. "I am no longer Arnold Gillespie. I am the boss, and you should remember that." "Oh, I'm shivering in my slippers, Arnold," Mrs. Gillespie replied. This time, both Bulldog and Mr. Gregson fought hard to suppress their giggles. Ben couldn't understand it. It was almost as if Mrs. Gillespie was trying to make her son mad. Arnold stood up and started ranting. "You and your band of geriatric rejects think you're so wise and untouchable. Well, you are wrong. I thwarted you once before, and I can do it again." "That was a long time ago, Arnold, and you only found out about us because Cedric left that file lying about." "No, Mother, you are wrong. I would have found out on my own. You always underestimated me." Arnold stamped his foot like a toddler. "You shouldn't have done that, Mother, because now I am just one step away from becoming the most powerful man in the world. Once you give me the access code to this computer, I'll be able to control all communication sent between military personnel all over the planet. And then do you know what I'll do, Mother?" Mrs. Gillespie stared directly at her son, but said nothing. "Well, let me tell you, I'll create the biggest war ever. Everyone will be fighting everyone else, and before anyone realises what's happened, I'll take over. Yes, Mother, you are looking at the first emperor of the world." Arnold finished his speech with outstretched arms. He glared at his henchmen, who both suddenly broke out in applause. "Well," squeaked Mrs. Gillespie, "I can't actually remember ever dropping you on your head as a baby, but it must have happened. I can't think of anything else that would make you so stupid." Now it was Ben's turn to laugh. Now it was Ben's turn to try not to laugh. "Stupid, am I? Well, we'll see soon enough, Mother. I bet you're sitting there feeling quite smug with yourself right now. You're thinking that my genius plan will never work because you will never give me the code. Mrs. Gillespie suddenly became rigid. Yes, this is what she had been thinking. Now she was wary. Arnold was up to something. She just knew it. Ah, now I've got you interested, haven't I, Mother? You see, I know your weakness. Mrs. Gillespie's eyes widened as Arnold left the room, chuckling to himself. Bum, bum, bum! Oh, what is going to happen? What is Arnold doing? I hope Ninja Nan and Sidekick Grandad hurry up and get there. So tune in tomorrow. Come back at 2 o'clock when we will be reading more from Ninja Nan and Sidekick Grandad by Annaliese Matheron. So I will see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.